right. Well, Woody Guthrie was a childhood hero of mine, and I've spent much of my adult life researching and writing about him. And to be honest with you, the more that I've learned about him, the less of a hero he's become to me, but more an object of simple admiration. Admiration for an admittedly flawed individual, determined to acknowledge his mistakes whenever he could, and to make amends for them, to make reparation, to make good. And I found this to be, in its own way, at least as inspiring as heroism. Now, the example that I want to focus on today is Woody Guthrie's racism. He was born into a racist culture, and like many white kids, he was raised unconsciously into a racist culture and as a racist. And during his young manhood, he wrote and said and sang some horribly racist things that can't simply be airbrushed out of his biography. But through a slow and steady and sometimes painful process of education, of enlightenment, he learned to take his own racism on board and ultimately to fight it down. Woody Guthrie proved by his own example that racists are not born, but they're made, and that they can be unmade. Now, I think we should all care about this because this whole issue of making reparation still seems to be such a fraught one. You know, never apologize. That seems to be the mantra for so many governments and nations as well as individuals. You know, just think of the ongoing slavery reparations debate. But psychologists, Melanie Klein and others, I think have shown beyond doubt that the failure or the refusal to make reparation means imprisoning oneself in a constant, unhealthy, and potentially crippling state of denial. And that certainly goes for nations and governments as well as individuals. Now, there are many ways of making reparation besides paying money. In Woody Guthrie's case, it meant openly acknowledging his mistakes, apologizing for them, and through his songwriting and other efforts, doing all that he could to repair any damage done. And I'm convinced that by the end of his life, Woody did arrive on the side of the angels in this regard. Still with feet of clay, of course, but all the more inspiring for it. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you to put yourselves in Woody's shoes, okay? Imagine that you were born somewhere near here, say Okemah, Oklahoma, in 1912, right? And that's where you grew up. Well, at that time, politics in your region, in your state, would have been dominated for the most part by the Ku Klux Klan, one of whose most ardent champions was your own father, Charlie Guthrie. I mean, there's no documentary evidence that he was ever a Klan member, but he certainly supported them. And there is some anecdotal evidence that he may have accompanied them on some of their night raids, and that he may, and I stress may, even have participated in the lynching of Laura and Lawrence Nelson from the Canadian River Bridge just outside of Okemah the year before your birth. And we know that this affected you very deeply because you later wrote a song about it. As I walk down that old dark town, the town where I was born, I heard the saddest, lonesome moan that I never heard before. My hair, it trembled at the roots, cold chills run down my spine. As I drew near that jailhouse, I heard this deathly cry. Don't kill my baby and my son. Don't kill my baby and my son. You could stretch my neck from that old river bridge, but don't kill my baby and my son. That song came much further down the line, though. When you were still in your 20s, you fled the Dust Bowl and you landed up in Los Angeles, where you continued to refer to black people in the most derogatory of terms. You got a radio gig, and one day you decided that you would play over the airwaves an old minstrel song with a title corrupted by that despicable word beginning with N. You announced it, and you played it. And then you got an outraged letter from an audience member. And this shook you to the core, so much so that you read it out over the air the next day. The writer politely reminded you of the despicable word you used. And then he said this: I'm a Negro, a young Negro in college, and I certainly resented your remark. Nobody of any intelligence uses that word over the radio. So, okay, you got slapped down, but most importantly, you learned from it, and you apologized. As you later said, I apologize to the Negro people for those frothings that I let slip out the corners of my mouth. Then you began to listen to and learn from friends who were maybe a little bit more enlightened than you at that time, like your good friend, the actor Will Geer, with whom you performed on picket lines up and down California. He, of course, would go on later to play Grandpa Walton on the Waltons on TV. And as your daughter Nora says, you know, I don't think my dad ever even heard the words, "that's racism," until he heard them from Will Geer. Well, your journey of enlightenment continued as you followed your good friend Will Geer from California to the New York Island. And in New York, you began to listen to and sing with and learn from African-American musicians who also became your good friends and mentors. Folks like Josh White, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee, and of course, Leadbelly. During the war, you joined the Merchant Marines, and you happily broke the rules by strolling into the black quarters to sing with the troops on ships that had been leased by a still segregated U.S. Army, still Jim Crow. And after the war, you took up the cause of black veterans returning from battle to face the indignities of Jim Crow at home. In the South, there was Isaac Woodard, a veteran of the Pacific Wars, beaten blind by police in South Carolina while wearing his Army uniform for demanding to use a public washroom that had been marked white only. Listen, Mr. Policeman, I started to explain. I didn't cause no trouble, and I didn't raise no cane. Well, he hit me with his billy club, and he cursed me up and down. He said, "Shut up, you black bastard," and he run me down into the town. As we walked along the sidewalk, my right arm he did twist. I knew he wanted me to fight back, but I never did resist. "Have you had your Army discharge?" I told him, yes, I had. Well, then he pasted me with that loaded stick down across my head. So I grabbed that stick, and we had a little run, and we had a little wrestle, till another cop run up with a gun and jumped into the battle. He said, "You don't drop that stick, black boy. It's me that's dropping you." So I figured to drop that loaded stick was the best thing that I could do. And they beat me about the head and face, and they left a bloody trail all down along the sidewalk to the iron door of the jail. They knocked me down upon the ground, and they poked me in the eyes. So when I awoke next morning, I found that my eyes was blind. They dragged me to the courtroom. I could not see the judge, but he fined me $50 for raising all of the fuss. Now you've heard my story. There's just one thing that I can't see: how you could treat a human being like they have treated me. I thought I'd fought on those islands to get rid of all their kind, but I can see the fight much plainer now that I am blind. Thank you. Thank you. And in the Jim Crow North, there were two brothers, Charles and Alphonsa Ferguson, one of them a veteran, both of them unarmed, gunned down by police outside a coffee shop that had refused them service in Freeport, Long Island, New York. You sang about their funeral and about 3 fatherless children. This morning, 2 hearses rolled out towards the graveyard. One hearse had Alfonso, the other took Charles. Charles's wife, Minnie, brought her 3 little children, and friends and relations in old borrowed cars. Nobody has told these 3 little boys yet. Everybody rides crying and shaking their heads. Nobody knows quite how to tell these 3 children that Jim Crow killed Alfonso and that Charles too is dead. Who will tell these 3 boys that their daddy is gone? He helped whip the fascists and the Nazis to death. Who will tell these 3 sons that it was Jim Crow coffee that killed several thousand, the same as their dad? And you began to write ballads celebrating your heroes from African American history, like the freedom fighter Harriet Tubman. When John Brown hit them at Harper's Ferry, my men were fighting right at his side. And when John Brown swung upon the gallows, it was then I hung my head and cried. Now give the black man guns, give the black man powder. To Abe Lincoln this I said, for you've only crippled the snake of slavery, but we got to fight to kill it dead. But you did more than write songs. You literally put your life on the line to stand in solidarity with the victims of race hatred and against American fascism. You were there on the ground during the bloody Peekskill riots of 1949 in New York State. You stood shoulder to shoulder with Paul Robeson, Pete Seeger, and up to 30,000 others facing the onslaught of racist mobs, Klansmen in plainclothes, and police in uniform. You saw the rioters smashing car windows, dragging peaceful concertgoers from their cars to beat them up. You stood on a bus that was being attacked. You were leading the frightened people in defiant songs of protest. We shall not be moved. We shall overcome. And then you went home and you sang about everything you'd seen. Paul Robeson, he's the man who faced down the Ku Klux Klan. Over Peekskill's golfing grounds, his words came sounding. All around him there to jump and clap and cheer. I sent the best I had, my 30,000. Well, the Klansman leader said old Paul would lose his head when 35,000 vets broke up his concert. But less than 4,000 came to side in with the Klan. And around Paul's lonesome oak, my 30,000. You got home from Peekskill, and you turned to fight against the racism on your own doorstep. After you and your family had moved into the Beach Haven apartment complex in Brooklyn, you learned that your landlord, one Fred C. Trump, was actively doing all he could to keep black people from renting there. And so you honored him with a rewriting of your celebrated Dust Bowl ballad, I Ain't Got No Home. Beach Haven ain't my home, I just can't pay this rent. My money is down the drain and my soul is badly bent. Beach Haven, that's your heaven where no black ones come to roam. No, 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 old man Trump, Beach Haven ain't my home. And across Beach Haven's grass, I see my brethren pass, trying to hide their misery beyond the window glass. We're all crazy fools as long as race hate rules. Oh no, no, old man Trump, Beach Haven ain't my home. No, 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 old man Trump, Beach Haven ain't my home. Thank you. You wrote those words on the 3rd of May, 1952. And exactly 4 months later, you were diagnosed with the Huntington's disease that finally took your life in October of 1967. But you left us with an explicit call to action. Fight racism, fight fascism, wherever you see it. So yours was truly a remarkable journey of awakening, of acknowledgement, and of repair. And you certainly did wind up on the side of the angels at the end of it all. So my own modest call to action is this. Let's set hero worship aside, and instead, let's all take inspiration from Woody Guthrie's example, not only with regard to racism, but with regard to all aspects of life that might be fit for reparation. Let us all constantly reflect, acknowledge, and repair so that by the end of our lives, we can join Woody on the side of the angels. Thank you very much.